Hi, this is Steve at heavenlysign2017.com. The watchmen on the wall are divided at this point over at least 6 major issues. Where's the dragon? Kind of like where's the beef? The calendar accuracy and the reliability. What calendar are we supposed to be using? The arrangement of days on a timeline. The accurate gestation period of Jupiter. The related feasts and how they play into all of it. The question of when 5778 began. And should we go and stone Stephen? Well, this video will review 2 highly relevant factors. The 2 witnesses and who confirms the covenant with Israel in the tribulation. Now, most of the awakened community won't pay any attention to what I'm about to present, and little, if any, of the religious establishment will. And I'm guessing maybe a half or 2/3 maybe of our subscribers will struggle through this video. But I believe some of you will, and you'll come to realize why the prophetic community has been grasping at straws trying to explain what went wrong on the Feast of Trumpets, when a proper understanding of what occurs at the midpoint of the tribulation shows nothing went wrong at all. The 2 witnesses highly suggest that our timeline is still correct. We continue to maintain that the timeline began September 21st without fanfare. The only mistake that we made was in saying September 21 had to be the rapture date. It does not. It simply began the 26-25 day countdown to the blessed day, the millennial reign of Christ. I'm about to remind you why our original 1290-1260 timeline remains valid, because a 1260-1290 timeline does not work starting at October 20 or any other day. And that's the 2 witnesses. They cannot show up on the same day that the tribulation begins. They must show up before then. Malachi 4:5, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Now we know that they must prophesy for exactly 1260 days of the 25-20 day period of the tribulation. In the beginning, 1260 days. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Revelation 11:3. If the midpoint is April 1 or April 2, then we need to subtract 3.5 or 4 days for their bodies to lie unburied and for people to send gifts. This puts their death on Passover, March 28, 2021. Subtract 1260 days from 3/28/21, and you arrive at October 14 or October 15, which is outside the 1260 day time frame, in no man's land, if you put the 1290 days at the end of the tribulation. That's why the 1290 days must be in the beginning of the 7-year time period. The 1290 days is the beginning of the timeline, and the 1335 days is from the midpoint to the very end. We know that Christ returns 1260 days after the midpoint. We also have the day counts of the 2 witnesses. The time frame of the ministry of the 2 witnesses lends weight to the 1290 days coming in front of the abomination of desolation, especially when the 1290 days backwards from the midpoint lands on the very day of the Feast of Trumpets, followed by the Revelation 12 sign. What more do you want? When you look at the scriptures having to do with the equivalent Hebrew date for the arrival of the two witnesses. That also lends credence to the timeline. Now then, the biggest hurdle in the two witnesses narrative is who confirms the covenant and takes away the sacrifice. If people think that it's the Antichrist, they resist the idea of Jesus confirming his covenant with believing Israelites as a result of their crying out to him for deliverance. There is an end times battle of the covenants taking place. I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but this is clearly what is happening in the text. If you read the text and you look at it closely, what you see is there is an end times battle of covenants going on between God and the Antichrist. There is two covenants, not just one. Most Christians believe that there's just one covenant, a covenant that an agreement of some type that the Antichrist makes with Israel as a whole. Okay, all of Israel falls under this agreement with this Antichrist, and it's the Antichrist's agreement with them. It's just one covenant. That's the common accepted view, the most commonly accepted view. That is not what the text says. That's not what it says. There are four indisputable facts that I want to go over here with you. Number one, you always have two parties, two groups. You have believing and non-believing. You see that in the text. Anybody that has studied these texts in Daniel can see that that is what's going on. I challenge you to look at that. If you're hearing my voice, go to Daniel. Go to Daniel chapter 9, 11, 12. Read it, okay? A 12th grader can understand it. You can see that there are two parties, two groups, believing and non-believing, okay? Number two, existing covenant confirmed, not made by God with the many. That's what you'll see. You'll see that God confirms an already existing covenant with the many, and it is referred to as a holy covenant. You don't think that the Antichrist makes some agreement with Israel and where that the God, the Holy Spirit in the Scripture calls it a holy covenant, do you? Look at it. It is an existing covenant confirmed, not made, confirmed by God with the many. His original covenant that he made, he confirms it. Non-believing Jews enter a covenant of death with the Antichrist. Different covenant. Not only is the covenant different, it's the person that Israel, the non-believing Jews, enter into that covenant with. Is different. You've got non-believing Jews, not believing Jews, entering into a covenant of death. Not life, of death, with, not God, but with the Antichrist. That's what you see in the text. Number four, the Messiah who is cut off in verse 26, 9:26, Daniel 9:26. The Messiah who is said to be cut off is not the one that makes desolate in verse 27. These are four indisputable facts that point out the fact that there is a battle of covenants taking place right here. Folks, I pointed this out months ago, many months ago, and I really kind of got beat up for it. Nobody really paid attention to it, and now everybody's at the end of this, after September, grasping at straws, trying to figure out what went wrong. I told you what the case was months ago. As I pointed out in in all the videos that I've done since I started this ministry, I never spent more time on any video than I did the 3 videos that I did on Daniel. And very few people paid attention to them. They should have. I pointed out in 3 videos many months ago that the grammar itself proves and has been confirmed by language grammar experts that the he of verse 27 refers to the Messiah in verse 26, not the prince who is to come. The original text states that he will confirm his already existing covenant with the many, not all Israel, who enter into a covenant of death with the Antichrist. The existing covenant is confirmed. The covenant of death is entered into. These are opposing covenants. You have a double fulfillment taking place here, the type and the antitype. A battle of two covenants is occurring here at the midpoint between believing and non-believing entities. You and I can't agree on anything now today. Very little, really. I mean, Christians, I'm speaking about Christians in general, you know, it's the same thing taking place then. You've got non-believing Jews entering into a covenant of death with the Antichrist, and you've got God confirming his already existing covenant with the many. That's what's going on. How come, ask yourself, stop and ask yourself when you've ever heard anybody talk about that, and yet that is exactly what the text is showing us. That's exactly the story that is being played out in Daniel. When the first seal of Revelation 4 is opened, Jesus will begin confirming the covenant with the many that he made with Abraham, sealed in his own blood. And this at the beginning of the tribulation period. Christ strengthens the real covenant, and a false confirmation of the covenant is made with non-believing Israel by the Antichrist. The true covenant is confirmed for the full 7 years. The false is broken in the middle of the week, and an abomination is set up in the rebuilt temple. Speaking of the Antichrist, Daniel 11:30 says that for ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened. This is talking about the Antichrist. The ships of Kittim, I believe that's southern Turkey, will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at, read it, the holy covenant, and take action so that he will come back and show regard or favor for those who forsake the holy covenant. Are you going to tell me that the Antichrist becomes enraged at and takes action against his own covenant of death that the non-believing Jews entered into with him? The text goes on to read, by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. You got two parties, folks. Those who have insight, the text says, among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Verses 32 and 33. Yeah. It's a battle of covenants. At the midpoint, when the Antichrist is revealed, an all-out assault on Israel begins. Believing Jews are targeted for extermination in an effort to eradicate the covenant people of God. If the Antichrist, who's in league with Satan, can wipe out Israel, folks, God will have no nation to have a covenant with. But we know how the story ends when Christ returns. I know this may be hard to accept, folks, since the traditional thought has been one of, there's just one agreement that the Antichrist makes with Israel in the tribulation period, at the beginning of the tribulation period. The church is raptured, and then the Antichrist, he shows up and he makes an agreement with Israel and blah, 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 and that's it. That's all you hear about. You're not hearing the whole story. And if you just read the text, you'll get it. You'll get the whole story. A simple reading of the text clearly states that this is not the case. You can remain stuck in that traditional mud hole of a mindset if you want, but the actual words of Daniel say different. This is not heavenly science words. This is not heavenly science 2017 words. This is the actual words of Daniel, and it amazes me that people can't see the difference. I'm kind of ticked that people have lied to me my whole life about it. That a battle of two covenants is occurring here between believing and non-believing parties, between God and Satan. Why is it so hard to believe that there is a contest occurring here between God and Satan, in which there are believers on one side and non-believers on the other? That's what's going on. I'm not mad, I'm just preaching. Look, I'm not slaughtering a sacred cow here. I'm pointing out what the text clearly says, that any of you who hear my voice can go to the text and read for yourself. Listen to me, folks. It is a battle of covenants. Satan knows that if he can exterminate those who cried out for deliverance, those who believed the testimony of the two witnesses, and who refused to enter into that covenant of death with the Antichrist, for these are the ones the Antichrist becomes enraged with, he wins and God loses. It is the mother of all end times battle between covenants. That is what will be taking place. A far different picture than simply one agreement all Israel makes with just one man possessed by Satan, where God stands back and he does nothing except watch everything unfold like some spectator at a New York Yankees baseball game. Daniel 12:11 now makes much more sense. It's not simply referring to you and me. And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed to the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." And from the time, here's the very next verse, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." In the original text, it literally reads, "And from the time that that which has continued is taken away." That begins the timeline. The rapture did not have to occur on September 21st for the timeline to begin, for the day count to begin. Israel has to have some reference point to be able to begin counting these days after we're gone. It is my steadfast belief that we're in the gap, days away from the tribulation beginning, and this after the rapture takes place, and that the two witnesses, this world is days away from the appearance of these two witnesses. So to go over this real quickly again, the day counts of Daniel are 7 years, divided into two halves of 1260 each. Most every Christian knows that. Most every Christian you ask, they know it's 7 years divided into two halves of 1260 days each. Not rocket science. And there's also a 1290 and a 1335 day count. Now here's where we're getting into a little, it's a little more scholarly, okay? You've got 1290 and a 1335 day count that have to be looked at. Most Christians I know don't even, you mean there's 1290 days? Oh, you mean there's 1335? Where do you come up with that at? The text clearly says it. 1290, 1335 days. You have something that's 1290 and 1335. Both the 7 year and the 1290, 1335 speak of an abomination of desolation event occurring at the midpoint. Daniel 9:27 and Daniel 12:11. The day counts for the two witnesses and the woman of Revelation 12 are both 1260 days. We know that. We cannot assume that all the 1260 days start and end at the same time. That is, the two witnesses showing up at the same time as the beginning of the tribulation, because each event appears in a context which will dictate when the count starts. Let's assume that the Feast of Trumpets started everything. Just give me that much, okay? Just for the sake of argument. Let's assume that the Feast of Trumpets started everything. September 21, 2017 would be our starting point. Somewhere approximately 3.5 years out there is the midpoint, the abomination of desolation. Okay. Now we know that the two witnesses die, and 3.5 days later is the abomination of desolation. They have a ministry lasting 1,260 days. The abomination of desolation is 1,260 plus 3.5 days after the two witnesses begin their ministry. We know that the beginning of the two witnesses' ministry lies outside the 1,260 day time frame. I'm going to say that again. We know that the beginning of the two witnesses' ministry lies outside the 1,260 day time frame because of their death. This suggests that the 1,290 day count rather than the 1,260 days begins before the midpoint rather than after the midpoint. If we begin with the Feast of Trumpets date and we add 1,290 days, we arrive at April 1 or 2 of 2021. When we subtract 3.5 days from April 1 or April 2, 2021, it brings us to the death of the two witnesses on Passover 3/28, that's March 28, 2021. March 28, 2021. And subtracting 1,260 days from 3/28/21. Are you following me here? Subtract 12, because this is when they died. We've got to subtract because 1,260 because they minister for 1,260 days. Subtract 1,260 days from 3/28/21 and it brings us to October 14 and 15 of 2017. October 14 and 15 of 2017. Now this is the same day, it happens to be the 24th day of the 7th month, that the returning exiles from the Babylonian captivity made a covenant with God to come back to him. Nehemiah 9:1-38. They cried out to God to deliver them and asked God to keep covenant with them. Nehemiah 9:32. This is what the Israelites will do in the end times. When they cry out to God for deliverance, he will hear them. When they desire to keep covenant with God, God will renew or strengthen his covenant with them. The covenant, which God's covenant, is confirmed 1,260 days before the abomination of desolation. April 1, 2, or 2 of 2021 minus 1,260 days brings us to October 19, 20, or 20 of 2017. Let me say that again. The covenant, God's covenant, is confirmed 1,260 days before the abomination of desolation on April 2 of 2021. Minus 1,260 days brings us to October 19 or October 20, 2017. The second coming of Christ is 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation. The second coming is 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation. You don't have 1,290 in the second half. The 1,290 is in the front, not the back end of this. The second coming of Christ is 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation, September 13, 2024. This is the Day of Atonement on TorahCalendar.com. But is 30 days before the Day of Atonement on most other Hebrew calendars. We need to remember that Jesus said that unless the days were shortened, no man would survive. Matthew 24:22. The book of Revelation speaks of cosmic disturbances which will affect our planet in ways that we can't even now begin to comprehend. Perhaps shortening the days, changing the date of the fall equinox. In any case, September 13, 2024 is 1260 days after the abomination of desolation, which is on April 2, 2021. And when we add 1335 days to the date of abomination of desolation from the midpoint, we arrive at November 27, 2024, the 24th day of the 9th Hebrew month, mentioned in Haggai 3 times as a day of blessing. Haggai chapter 2, chapter 18, and chapter 20. And just so happens the following day is the first day of Hanukkah. Daniel 12:12 says, "Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1335th day." The day of the abomination of desolation is a very important day. It begins the time of the wrath of God. The 2 witnesses are resurrected and ascend to heaven on this day. The woman of Revelation 12 and the remnant of Matthew 24 flee into the wilderness, and it begins the Great Tribulation period. It begins the 42-month reign of the beast. There's a giant earthquake that splits the Mount of Olives and presumably destroys the temple. Revelation chapter 11 says there will be a rebuilt temple that stands for 42 months. In talking with Brenda, she believes that the decree for the rebuilt temple will happen on the day that the covenant is confirmed. That the decree for the rebuilt temple is the little scroll that the mighty angel of Revelation 10 is holding out that John takes and eats. It's sweet to his taste, but makes his stomach bitter. In other words, the rebuilt temple is a wonderful thing to start with, but it ends in desecration and disaster. When the beast defiles the temple, the Lord will destroy both the temple and the Antichrist sacrifice on the day of the abomination. Daniel 9:27. The 144,000 of Revelation 7 will be marked and sealed prior to this, perhaps even on the day of first fruits in 2021, 3 days after the 2 witnesses are killed, but before the abomination of desolation occurs. This follows the pattern of Ezekiel 9:3 and 6, where the Lord has his angels place a mark on those who sigh and groan over the abominations that are in the temple, and to begin the destruction with the temple itself. There's reason to believe that the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38 will occur soon, within days. It is at this time that Israel will be miraculously delivered by God. The war may begin shortly after the rapture of the church, when the world is thrust into confusion, particularly the United States, which will be in no position to come to the aid of Israel. Since the dead rise first, and resurrection is often accompanied by earthquakes, Jesus' resurrection and also the resurrection of the 2 witnesses mention this phenomenon. It is possible that the U.S. will suffer massive debilitating earthquakes at the same time as the rapture or the resurrection event. This event may also trigger an EMP-like phenomena as the power of God is manifested into this realm, a type of singularity where dimensions collide. Brenda expects that the power grid will be shut off for a while and communication will be difficult. The enemy will take advantage of this situation to pull together a cover story of why people are missing. Eventually everything will find a new normal and life will go on, but it'll be very, very difficult, especially for people who come to the Lord during this time. The chaos that will be unleashed because of the rapture will be short-lived. The 2 witnesses will proclaim Christ and be invincible until the time that their testimony is complete. On the day of Passover 2021, they'll cause many to turn to Christ. The 144,000 of Israel, the remnant, and the Gentile saints of Revelation 7. At the midpoint, the remnant will have a place of safety for the remainder of the tribulation. The 144,000 will be spared the wrath of God, but not the wrath of the Antichrist, who will cause him to be beheaded. The Gentile saints will be spared nothing, many of them having been put to death before the midpoint. And then Christ returns 1260 days later, with the armies of heaven, with the church, with us, to reclaim the earth, punish the wicked, raise the righteous dead, and enter into his rule and reign. The sheep and goat judgment of Matthew 25 will take place at this time as well. So today is a good day. It's a good day to get right with the Lord. If you're hearing my voice and you do not know him, you're out of time. It's a good day to share the gospel message with everybody that you come into contact with, because all of this is about to happen sooner than later. The Lord is near. He's at the door. I love you guys. I truly do. Thanks for watching.